The views expressed on this show by guests and the host on issues outside of the 9/11 controlled demolition evidence are the opinions of those individuals alone and do not necessarily reflect those of architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of 9/11 Freefall. I am the host, Andy Steele, and today we are joined by a great volunteer with Project Due Diligence and a petition signer. This is Eric Francis-Wright. He is a civil engineer in bridge and transportation structure design, private and public firms. As I just said, he's a signatory to AE 9/11 Truth's petition, and he's volunteered to give presentations for Project Due Diligence when they come up in his area. So we're going to be learning a lot more about this gentleman today. Let's go ahead and bring him into the stream. There he is. Eric, welcome to 9/11 Freefall.
Hello. Hi, Andy. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for coming on. And I know we had to work out some technical issues in doing it, but you've been very patient with us and you're coming through very clear, and I hear you very well. So we're going to be getting into it today. And the first thing I'm going to have you do is elaborate on your career as an engineer. Talk a little bit more about it.
All right. I'll go from where I started. I graduated from Temple University, got my BS in civil engineering. I interned after that for a private firm. I'm not sure if I want to name firms right now, but pretty high level private firm. I did design for 2 years in the office. After that, I kind of went out into the field more. I did work on the Tappan Zee Bridge project, which was a pretty huge project on the East Coast here. I was there for 4 years, and now I'm at the state position, dealing with transportation and railroad engineering.
Very accomplished. And our director of strategy, Ted Walter, mentioned that Tappan Zee Bridge, and he wanted to make sure I ask you about that because he's familiar with that bridge.
Oh, really?
It's very important. So basically, tell us about that construction project and some of the work that goes into designing bridges. I imagine it must not be an easy thing.
No, it's not. So during that time, I was actually an engineer for the contractor. So I was more on the field and construction side of the engineering. I could speak to that aspect of it. It was a huge project. I believe they were doing design for like 7 years before, they broke ground. But, design build project, a lot of fast paced things going on, very large beams, very large cranes being used to set those beams in place. A lot of it was fast tracked, so they would like pre-assemble everything offsite, bring it down on barges, and erect it on site, off the barges. I was in charge of a lot of the marine aspects, so kind of managing what was coming in and off site, what material was on which barge, staging the barges for the day and in advance, and then just general site safety, mooring, piles, anything that had to do with the water. I pretty much was like on a boat, riding around on a crew boat in the water all day for 4 years. So I got to see it come up out of the ground, and it was amazing.
Spending all day on a boat, that sounds like a very, it probably wasn't super relaxing if you're doing work and stuff, but it'd be pretty nice though to go out into the water every day and enjoy the weather, unless it's probably not good weather, then that wouldn't be as enjoyable. I always
Okay.
wonder too, oh, I wanted to ask you because I've always thought about this with bridges that you get to a certain depth, right? And so you got to do some construction work pretty far under the water and embed that, I would assume, into the ground, the very
Hmm.
bottom surface of the
Yeah.
lake or wherever you're going. Just briefly, just tell us like what's involved in that.
So at first they'll do a boring report just to see how deep the bedrock is. You want the pile to hit bedrock, and actually the way the Hudson River is, part of it was too deep to reach bedrock. So like half the bridge, you have piles that do hit bedrock, and then the other half they just were friction piles. So basically, you have a pile driver, and it impacts the pile, up to they basically measure the movement, and once you get like less than half an inch of movement per 3 or to 10 hits or something like that, then they'll call it good, and that'll be set for friction. But a lot of the piles went down about I'd say like 200 to 300 feet. They'd have to like splice three at a time, something like that. So
A lot of work goes into it. People drive over the bridge for probably, I don't know, 20 seconds or something and don't think anything about it, but a lot of planning and thought goes into it. It reminds me of this meme I saw on Facebook where it shows, it was a meme about planning, and I don't think it's real. I think somebody photoshopped it, but it showed two sides of a bridge being constructed and they're not meeting with each other. And it shows like workers standing there like dumbfounded and says
yeah,
something about the importance of planning. I imagine if there was really a disaster like that, we probably would have heard of it, but it's still pretty funny.
right.
What drove you into engineering? What made you decide that you wanted to take this profession on?
I always grew up kind of into science, into I liked architecture early on. I was first really absorbed with the pyramids, and fascinated about how they were able to do that during those ancient times. I think that was my first introduction to like engineering. But before I started college, I thought I wanted to be an architect until I kind of saw how artsy it was, and it was a little too a little too artsy, a little too not enough like structure that I was looking for. So then I gravitated towards engineering, and that was a little more straightforward. I like the physics of it, and I still love architecture, but you know being able to know how the materials and forces that you need to make these artsy architectural drawings happen is what I'm interested in the most.
Well, that is probably the most important aspect of it is making it stand up. Sometimes you see some structures get designed and you wonder how is that even like staying up, It seems like you could
Yeah,
just tip it over with some weight to one side or something, but you guys are
yeah.
the ones that figure it out and make it happen. So God bless you. And of course, your perspective is so important when it comes to the main topic of this show, which is September 11th. So my earbud's falling out. Let me put that back in there. But let's get to it. 9/11. Tell us your 9/11 story. I think you wrote that you were in New York City that day when it happened.
Yeah, so I was 11 years old. I believe that was sixth grade. It was just a really eerie day. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary in the morning. Up until, well, while I was in school, going to school, up until like I believe it was around 9 o'clock that it happened. But I guess late that morning, the school got really quiet, and a lot of teachers were coming in and out of class. The principals were like walking around going class to class. They weren't really telling the kids what happened. until people started coming and picking up their kids. And a lot of parents were like just picking up their kids randomly. And then, they finally said there was an attack in New York City. And from where I was in Queens, you couldn't see the towers, but you could see the smoke coming off the towers. And I was actually riding public transportation to school back then. And I just remember on the way home, it was just dead silent. Like, New York City is really not that silent. Not it's kind of like COVID. I don't know if you were in a city environment during COVID, but just imagine like all the people, but just the same silence. Like nobody was saying anything. And I didn't see the actual footage of the towers until I got home, and I spoke to my mom, and she was so nervous, and nobody knew what was going to happen. But yeah, I'll always remember that day, 11 years old. To this day, I remember how it went.
It must have been so crazy seeing the skyline of New York City for the first time without those towers. I mean, they were so iconic. They always appeared in movies whenever they would flash to signify that somebody's in New York City. The first thing they would show is the Twin Towers standing there. So, I mean, it was just so identifiable as a New York City landmark that just to see them gone for the first time and replaced by nothing at first, almost like two missing teeth.
Yeah. I never went inside the towers. I wasn't able to go to the observation deck, but I've been right outside World Trade Center, and like the One World Trade, I personally don't like it that much. But if you were ever at the old World Trade Center, the magnitude, like the size of those two buildings was like it's really hard to explain the magnitude of the size of those two buildings. Like just looking up, of course they're just like straight rectangular buildings, but they were massive, and you almost had to your head would be hitting your back to look up and see it straight up. So
yeah. I remember I was there a year before. I stood at that globe thing that they had there in the plaza. We were trying to find something else, and my friend said, "Oh, we're at the World Trade Center." And I said, "Okay, cool." But they were huge, and they just you look up, straight up, and it seems like they just go on forever. How long did it take for New Yorkers, just New York City, the vibe in New York City, to regain some sense of normalcy after this horrible event took place? I mean, I was there in December afterwards, and it still felt like just a weirdness floating in the air, just like you go to a funeral or something. I mean, how long did that feeling continue since you were there in the city experiencing it?
Honestly, if you ask me, I'll say it never got back. It never returned. It was always different since that day. Of course, everyone started, to get back to work and to go on with their daily lives and do what they had to do. But the vibe in the city has never been the same since then. Everyone has been on alert since that day. Security became a primary issue with everyone since that day. So, just being in the city, it just wasn't the same. You'd always think like, hey, I'm in this building. This could be the last time that, I might not make it out, no matter where you were, just because of 9/11. So I think that was always in the back of people's minds. And, just being from New York, I could go to the city now and I still feel the same way. So.
Yeah, it must have been even especially scary being a kid because you got TV telling you, that this could happen again at any moment here. I remember how that was. And I was in Florida, so it was like, yeah, probably nothing's going to happen down here. This is before I knew the, about the controlled demolition evidence. But when you're there in New York City and you've already been targeted like that, I imagine that must be really scary thinking something could happen at any moment again.
Yeah. I always try to be positive and just try to stay away from like the fear aspect of it. But the fact that it happened means that it could happen again, and I wasn't one to be afraid to go back into the city, or feel like it's not safe. But it just sits in the back of your mind that a lot of people died on this day, from these buildings coming down, and there was uh, there was nothing they could have really done to prevent that. Or the
Yeah, and
people.
all they did was go to work that day too.
That's
That's
all
what's
they
so
did.
scary,
Yeah,
you know.
that's all they did.
Um, and you never know how fast things can happen. That's why it's cherish every day and all the people around you for as long as you can, because you never know what's going to happen tomorrow. So you signed our petition, and I want to hear about how you started questioning 9/11. I also want to know, what did it do to your world when you started to wake up to the evidence that we were deceived?
When did I? I've always been someone to try and deal with facts, to try and approach things from a factual standpoint. And I guess what I was hearing is like the main thing that the media was pushing was that it was a pancake collapse, and I can remember even from being 11, even from a young age, I just never brought into the idea that that was a pancake collapse. That just seeing that the way it came down. So I always from the main media story being a pancake collapse, I always rejected that notion, and that kind of forced me to look into other realms, of the internet and social media, to find other people who might have felt the way I do, and that's how I found AE for 9/11 Truth.
So you didn't believe this from the start. Good for you.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that pancake collapse, and of course they changed the official story. Well, the official story came out about the pile driver, but initially in the media, you're right, they were putting out this idea that the floors hit each other, falling like records on a spindle. Nova even put out an animation to try to enforce this in people's minds. Of course, they left the core structure still standing in the animation, which looks good, except when you compare it to what actually happened, and that's not what happened. You can see that there was nothing still remaining there. So that had to be quickly abandoned. But you notice this effort, instead of an intellectual curiosity into diving into why this actually happened, the media just kind of wanted to throw out anything, just anything, to give you everybody an explanation so we could go on with the agenda as as was laid out for us. And then they came up with a more an
Right.
official story after looking at it more deeply.
Right. And of course, I mean, I believe you know this, and your viewers probably know this, but anytime that there's like an engineering mishap, a failure, a collapse of some sort, the immediate thing is to do an investigation of what happened. And when you investigate, you use the materials that from the site, and you do an advanced study using those materials to find out what happened. And from my knowledge, the materials were like scrapped immediately and just sent overseas for scrap. All that steel, all the beams, the rebar, everything was just kind of shipped off. And in my opinion, they should have had it laid out, on a huge site somewhere where they could kind of literally lay everything that they could find back together, and then find out all the failure points, the weak points, where was it, the bolts here, the rivets here, what caused it to collapse like this. Uh, I never got that answer. So that's,
Uh,
kind of why I'm here.
Yeah, you never got it from the official people. Of course, we're giving an answer. You're giving an answer by adding your name to
Right,
that
right,
petition, questioning it, because the most likely evidence, well, what the evidence shows, the most likely explanation is that it was controlled demolition, and that evidence never changes. I mean, the other side, they've kind of changed things over the years a little bit. They still stick with the pile driver theory on the Twin Towers and the progressive collapse on World Trade Center 7. But even they don't even fully agree on their official story. So there's a weakness there, and that's why we need a new investigation and ultimately an acknowledgement. Because to me, the story has already been told. We know what happened on that day. So thank you for stepping forward and be willing to give presentations. You haven't done so yet, but we're going to be getting them in your area hopefully very soon. Now, you're an engineer, obviously. You've got to go forward in life and make a career in doing this and deal with other engineers. I imagine discussions come up about different things at times that are off the topic of your current projects. Have there been any serious discussions in your engineering circles that have come up where the Twin Towers or Building 7 have been discussed? And if so, what were those like?
Yeah, it's funny you said that. So my first job, working at a structural design firm, like a high level firm, like I said, this was around let's say like 2013. I forget what happened, but for some reason, World Trade Center was like being spoken about. And I asked some of my coworkers. Most of them were way more qualified than me. Guys that have been practicing for much longer than me. Licenses, everything. And I asked them, do you believe like this happened because of the planes? Do you think the planes caused this building to perfectly implode? And they were so taken back. They were like, well, what do you think happened? And I said, well, I don't know exactly, but I don't think this happened because of planes crashing perfectly into these floors that made it perfectly implode. And they just really, they couldn't give me an answer, but they kind of just brushed it off as if I didn't know what I was talking about. And they kind of just brought the initial story. There's one pivotal point. I don't know, like if you want to get to this yet or what, but there's one pivotal point during the collapse. I forget if it's the North Tower or the South Tower, but the top portion, I guess when you say the pile driver effect, the top portion that was supposed to be pushing down the rest of the floors under it. If you look at the spire during that collapse, it started to go off on an angle. And it was almost on I would say it was like 60, maybe 70-degree angle. Let's say 20 degrees off center. In my opinion, if that started to happen, it should have continued to topple and not bring down the rest of the floors under it. It should have toppled over, and then those floors would be standing with that top piece, falling over onto the ground. So the fact that that spire started to lean and then it recorrected and centered itself, that tells you that there were other forces other than that top portion pushing the building down. Because if it was leaning, it would follow that trend, and one side of the building would be collapsing faster than the other, and that would force the topple. But that's not what happened. So in order for it to correct itself, that means that either there was nothing there, it was giving out under itself, and the top portion was not pushing the rest of the building down, or there were some other forces that caused the spire to correct itself.
That's right. It's a very good point. A couple of years ago, I made a little cheat sheet of all of these facts and things to cite, and that is right on it. And that is something that should be taken into account more and more. It's a great point you bring up there because, some kind of correction happens. I think it's on the South Tower, unless I'm wrong, but I think it was on the one without the antenna, so that'd be the South Tower, and it starts to go to the side, and then there's some kind of action that happens that causes it to change its direction and then fall into the building where it should have fallen onto the plaza below. So you're talking about in 2013, you're a young engineer, you're talking about this at work, and you basically just kind of hear them reinforce the official story. But they really haven't studied it all that much. Engineers, because the other side will come out and say, oh, they don't agree with you. But you come to find out a lot of them don't even know there's questions about why these towers came down. They just were handed an official story. They nodded their head and went on with their lives and whatever projects they were working on. So I want to try to address the fears of engineers out there who might be watching this and saying, oh, I can't start talking about this because of this or that, or the whole sky is going to fall on me, or whatever. Hypothetically, if this comes up at a lunch break and an engineer just emphatically states, I don't believe the official story, I think there were explosives involved. I mean, what is the worst thing from your experience that can happen to them?
The worst? In my experience, the worst thing that could happen is that people will think that I mean, I don't even know. You're entitled to your opinion. Like I don't think anything bad could happen per se. People might not maybe want to talk to you about this topic, maybe. Maybe they'll distance themselves from you on certain topics. I don't think you'll get fired. That's my opinion. Maybe if your boss lost someone in 9/11 and say, I don't think this is bad. Maybe if it's personal, there could be some type of back, but I think that's really far out. I think, in my opinion, the worst thing that could happen is people just think that you have out there, kind of out of this world opinions, and maybe they'll distance themselves from you. Maybe you'll lose a friend or two, but that's it.
Well, I'll tell you what, I graduated from high school a long time ago and I left that world. So if people don't like you because you tell the truth or state your mind, you probably don't need them anyway. That's my personal view. And yeah, I mean, if somebody lost their family on 9/11, you might want to factor that into what you say. But if you're out in Oklahoma or something and, the chances of them having lost someone on that day are less, I say speak loud and speak proud, because that's the only way that we're going to ever have a cultural change on this issue, is if people stop being afraid of, being called a name or something, and just speak the truth. And then it emboldens everyone else around you to start speaking the truth, right, too, or at least looking into it.
Right. But going back to what you were saying, the idea that I got from bringing it up with a few coworkers is that they never questioned it. They never questioned the story, like, at all. They just, I sent them a couple videos on YouTube. I said, watch this and get back to me. And I gave them timestamps and things to analyze. And I know these are, highly analytical people. They have knowledge of structures and engineering that, I don't have, but they wouldn't even question it. And I think that's the main thing is just, are you going to just go along with the norms, or are you going to be a person that seeks truth, and are you going to be satisfied with information that you don't think is good enough, at the end of the day?
Yeah, and a lot of people pass the buck. They say, hey, it wasn't my job to investigate it. I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to look into this. I don't even want to know this. But we all need to know this because, as we all know, the authorities, the people that we paid all this money to through taxes to investigate this, they gave us a whitewash, and they didn't incorporate the observable facts. That's what William Binney said in his statement when he signed the petition. Former NSA director said, and that's a perfect way to state it. You just ignore evidence, ignore facts that you can actually see there on the camera. So we all have to be vigilant. We all have to be aware of this, and especially the people like yourselves with engineering backgrounds who have something to say on this. This is a question I wanted to ask, and I haven't asked an engineer this yet, so you're the first. Do you think, as an engineer, that by constantly propping up this official story, by the media, government, not allowing talk of controlled demolition, do you think they're doing a disservice to the engineers that put these buildings up to begin with? The people who made sure that these things could stand, even that they could withstand airplane impacts up to a certain size and all of that, took into account all of these factors, knowing that these were going to be very important buildings in the skyline of New York, having lots of people in them. I mean, do you find it as I know you're not one of the people who put the buildings up, but would you find that as an insult to not even allow investigation into this, whether or not another force brought these buildings down? They had nothing to do with the structure.
It's a huge disservice. I mean, the first thing they'll teach you on engineering is ethics, is having the code of ethics. And, there's certain positions or careers out there, doctors, lawyers, judges, things of that nature, where being ethical is basically like your highest priority of the job. Being able to do the job, of course, is most important, but then conducting yourself with a code of ethics is what governs that career to be as important and needed in society as it is. And if you are giving out false information, then that's unethical. So you violated the code of what it takes to be an engineer. And not only did you violate it, you're spreading this information, you're writing it down in history as something that it's not. So, it's not just like you're telling a group of friends, this is history. We're living this. I have kids, I have 3 kids. So if one of my sons opens a book and reads about 9/11, and he reads, it happened from jet fuel and a pile driving effect from the top of the building, he's gonna think that's what happened, when that's not what I believe, and a lot of us do. That's not true. So I do believe is very morally wrong to keep pumping out information as they are.
Right, and you're not teaching them to think either, to think for themselves. I mean, just even an acknowledgement that there's other people who question this out there, putting that in our history books too, at least that lets you know that the story is not settled. But of course, they're not going to teach the kids that, because that'll open up a whole can of worms. I think 3rd grade is around the time they teach the patriotism and all that stuff. So they certainly can't have them, doing the Pledge of Allegiance in the morning while telling them, well, the government's lying about why these buildings came down and all these people died. You're absolutely correct.
It's very true. It's very true. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you have kids, and this is actually, and we didn't plan it this way, I swear, but this actually kind of goes into my next question, because we're handing the kids, all of them, a world here where this big lie has been solidified in the public consciousness. I know you already sort of talked about this, but please elaborate. What do you think about that fact that this is just going to be cemented in the next generation's minds if we don't succeed at what we're doing?
That's scary. That's scary. It's scary because, look, that 9/11 is not the only historical event that's been documented per se. We know this has happened before, and it will happen again. But it's scary to know, at least to be so close to it. As an engineer, I practice in the profession. To be so close to it and to know that there's misinformation being cemented in history is scary, because then now what do you believe? It just opens up a whole that whole can of worms. Because if they could easily piece this story together, and literally the world just all right, keeps moving now as if, okay, that's what you say. Now we're just gonna, as if nothing happened. Um, what else have we been lied to about? And at what point, where do you draw the line to where the truth is acceptable to tell? You know what I mean? There's no line. It's just it's just whoever's in power, for whoever has the common interest, they're gonna tell the story that benefits them. And it's sad, but I know there's a lot of people out there that understand these things that I'm talking about, and there is information out there. It's just not the majority. It's just not the popular one. But in a case like 9/11, I feel like in my lifetime it's gonna come out that the NIST report was not true, and I don't know what's going to be the backlash to that happening, but I do believe it will happen.
And there's a lesson right there, is that the winners are the ones who write history, or whoever is in power, and they can't control everything. I mean, they can't micromanage every aspect of society. Even when they pave over an entire field, dandelions still grow up through the cracks, and those are the people that we have to seek out and get a lot of information from. But we got to win this in the end, because if they're lying about that, what's the next thing they're going to lie about,
Exactly.
So you're a man of science, and you mentioned earlier that you started off in architecture, but then you wanted to go to the more solid science of keeping the building standing. I'm paraphrasing, but I want to know, why is it so important to stick to the science when you're taking on a deception this big and avoiding speculation?
Science is fact. Science is universal. And I was going to say this point before. I believe what they're saying about 9/11 is that a couple things happened physically that have never happened before. As far as like structures and buildings. And to say that, you're saying like this, on this day, this one event happened that has never happened in history, is you're pushing it really far away from the science, because we've seen buildings come down before, and 9/11 it resembled other buildings that came down. But then to say that these buildings came down in a way that has never happened in history, I guess like the speed, they were coming down in free fall speed, and to document that in history is absurd to me. It's really absurd. That and I can't believe that more people, in the community and in the profession don't question something like that, because like I said, science and physics, these are fact. These are what govern our universe. The laws of physics pretty much stay consistent until you like go to other depths of the universe, until you start going into black holes and you start messing with massive amounts of gravity and stuff like that. But on Earth, things are going to remain pretty much the same, across the board, physically, or physics wise. So then to go and say this is the first time that this happened, and not explain it properly, you're really, I believe we're hurting ourselves, or the people that are saying that. We're it's doing more damage than it is good, in my opinion.
Yeah, and people always say, where was our Air Force on that day? I say, where was our physics? Physics stood down on that day, because they still apply even during a big mass casualty event. Even when there's political ramifications from the event, the physics still apply. And you're absolutely right. It was the first time that, especially in the case of Building 7, no airplane hit it. I mean, how do you even try to explain that? Well, they try to. It doesn't make a whole lick of sense. But they put it out there, and they've got a huge corporate media conglomerate out there reinforcing it. I mean, somebody just wrote into us. They said this is the biggest mass perception event in our history, where they're trying to control the perception of this entire thing for the last 20 years. And a lot too, like when the 9/11 truth movement first started really getting legs around 08, 09. I mean, they just put on a huge amount of propaganda, History Channel and all of that. And then every 9/11, they come up with the same stories, just trying to reinforce that official story and put it down. So we've got the facts. We just got a sociological problem here. And this kind of leads into my next question. I always find the scariest horror movies to be the movies where everybody is going along with a crazy thing, and there might be one or two people that are like, this is crazy, why are we doing this? And there seems to be like a madness around everyone else in the society, and you could apply that to this situation. That's what I find to be the most disturbing about this. I want to know the entire situation, the fall of the towers, the fact that it was demolition and they refused to even look at it. The post 9/11 world, essentially. What do you find to be the most disturbing about it?
Most disturbing. The most disturbing is that it was so quickly generally accepted. The most disturbing is that innocent people died, and we all seen the people that jumped before the towers, fell and all that stuff. Those people are owed the truth. They're owed the right to know what happened. Their families, their future families. A lot of them had kids, that will grow up. They're owed to know the right that happened, and I think it disturbs me that the world kind of just brushed over this event, and now those casualties are just seen as an accident, and 9/11 it happened too perfectly to be an accident.
Right. And by accident, what do you mean by like just the fact that the buildings came down because of the airplanes when they didn't expect it to happen?
Right. Well, I mean, I would guess most people would see it. It was a terrorist attack, most people would say. But I don't know if people think that the plan was for the buildings to come down. I think people think, all right, planes were hijacked, they ran them into buildings. I don't think anyone expected the terrorists to have planned for the buildings to perfectly implode on themselves. So in that aspect, I would say it's an accident that the buildings came down. But again, if you look at how perfectly it happened, I mean, it's really sad, but at the same time, it's kind of amazing if you really think about it. If you look at it from a scientific and physics point of view, like we were saying, it's kind of incredible the way that it happened. There was minimal damage to all the other buildings in the area. Some of them had massive amounts of damage, but if you think about how much building, like what is it, 220 floors for the two main towers, if you add them up, and then building 7, for all of that to come down, perfectly implode, and the rest of the area basically remain standing, is kind of incredible. I don't know if that could happen again if you planned it again. So that being said, it's really disturbing that it happened like that, and then people are just gonna be herded like sheep to believe something that's not true.
Right, and it's a hard event to replicate scientifically too, unless you're using computer models like the University of Alaska. I know people write into us and say, "Oh, maybe you could fund having airplanes crash into tower-like structures." It's like, come on, you can't do that. You can't replicate what happened, so it makes it very hard to. Well, it's not hard to investigate, but it gives the other side something to argue about because there is no like event where you just sit down and put down lawn chairs and watch it and see if you can make it all happen again. It's like a one-time thing. And then, as you said, all the buildings in the area, I mean, they caught fire and there was damage, but they didn't come down straight down symmetric like World Trade Center 7. And the minor amount of damage on the corner of Building 7 had nothing to do with initiating its collapse. Even NIST acknowledges that. So they got to come up with a flimsy thermal expansion story. Young engineers watching, common question I ask, and you got some experience under your belt now, so you can give them advice. How do you stay true to yourself out there, especially when issues like this come up, and still be successful in your career? How do you move forward in your career without compromising?
You have to be able to separate you have to be able to separate your truth from the media. You have to be able to separate where you stand as a person from the masses of people. You have to play the game to get by. You know what I mean? If you're a young engineer and you're on the come up, and you want to do what you have to do and reach those high level positions, it's probably not going to help you to state where you stand, about topics like this. But at the same time, you have to know, and you have to keep that alive, that you know the truth, even though everyone else around you is believing the lie. You know what I mean? And then I guess the next step is to find other like-minded people who feel the same way, which is how I got to AE Truth. Is because for the longest I felt like I was the only one. So when I saw this petition and I saw all the the media and documentation that was created around this to support the other non-supportive theories of how the buildings came down, I instantly jumped on because I was looking for that. I was looking for other people that I knew I couldn't be the only one that felt this way. And I found them. So I would say, know your truth, keep your truth, no matter what you have to do. Play the game, but also align yourself with like-minded people, and that's how you'll grow strength to actually create a change.
Absolutely, absolutely. And someone's got to be bold first. Someone's got to speak out, and then the first followers are important too. There's actually a video that talks about this and how important it is to give somebody that credence and back them up when you agree with them. A common thing we always hear is, "Oh yeah, you're right about 9/11, controlled demolition, but this can't come out. America couldn't survive it. Our stock market would crash the next day. All the food would disappear from the shelves, trucks would stop running, and it's not worth it. It's not worth it just for those 3,000 lives that died on that day." That's the essence of what some people say. What do you think? Do you think America could survive a revelation this big?
I do. To be honest, I don't even think it would cause that much of a disruption. Sadly, I mean, the state of just politics now, I think people just want to survive right now. You know what I mean? And the fact that, time does help. It being, 20 plus years since 9/11, that does help. I think if the truth came out like a year or two after, it would have a much larger effect. But now, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I might be going off too far, but Pearl Harbor, isn't that accepted that wasn't like an attack on the U.S. for the most part? That was kind of like
I
a staged
Yeah,
event.
I don't know. I don't know. I've read a few things about it, and there was. I mean, it seems that they were doing a lot of stuff to sort of provoke it, but I don't know the details of how much they knew beforehand. It certainly got us into the war and had that Pearl Harbor effect that gets cited later on by the PNAC people. But yeah, there's a lot of things. Here's what I could say about it. It seems like when I was growing up in history, I had this perception, watching G.I. Joe as a kid on the Saturday morning cartoons, that it was always a situation. Every war that we got into was a situation where we were the good guys. We got unjustly attacked and we had to go avenge it. Like some kind of action movie. Charles Bronson, there's a mild mannered architect minding his
Yeah,
business. His family gets attacked, so now he's got to go out and pump a bunch of people
right.
full of lead,
Yeah,
and that was like what I grew up believing. Like, we're the good guys, and look how colorful our flag is. Their flag is kind of creepy looking and has some very, like greens and things like this. So they're the bad guys, and and so that's what I grew up thinking. So it just seems very fortuitous that a lot of things always begin with these kinds of stories, like Pearl Harbor and such.
yeah,
There's usually a little bit more to the story.
right.
In anything when you dig into it. So that's my thoughts on it.
Yeah. So like similar to what I was saying, since Pearl Harbor happened so long ago, I think if it came out today that, it was kind of self-provoked to enter into a war, I don't think the stock market would crash. So I think 9/11 now has that same effect, that if it came out today that, this was kind of provoked so that we could enter a war for other agendas, the market wouldn't crash. Some people would even not believe that statement, even if it came out officially. They would still, go with the people are gonna believe what they want to believe. They're gonna refuse certain things. And like you said, everyone wants to believe that we're always the good guys. And I will say this. I do think of this sometimes from a high level standpoint. And I will say that if you want to have one of the strongest nations in the world, there's certain things that you may not be able to tell the citizens if you want to keep that power. I believe 9/11 is one of those things. But like I said, you just have to know your truth and keep that true to yourself.
Right. And I always say the 3D effect of our activism is we make people smarter. You wake people up to this. It's like a starting point to say, hey, don't believe everything that you're told on television out there. It's not really good for you, and look out for yourself and take care of yourself. And I don't have any money in the stock market. So I'd probably be okay. But even so, I think we'd be better off as a country by living in the truth. It's like if you're a woman in an abusive relationship and you're getting smacked around, like, you might have some security here, but your life is very bad from one day to the other. So it might be better to just set yourself free and stand up on your own 2 feet. I think America would do the same thing. Americans all over the country. All right, probably last question here because we're running low on time. But engineers might be sitting on the fence. They're watching this, trying to get their courage up. Why do they need to sign that petition? Why do they need to just ignore their fears or put them aside and add their name to the list along with you?
I get that there are three things that kind of stood out to me about 9/11. One of them was Aspire that we spoke about. It started to lean in and then it corrected itself. The other one was like the pancake collapse. If you look at the debris, the rubble, it was way too low. There wasn't enough debris for 110 floors to be collapsed on each other. And then the third was that the rubble was hot. There was like a molten fire under there for weeks. I think it was more than 2 weeks. The steel was melted. And then if you do studies on the temperature it takes for steel to melt, you would realize that it couldn't just be jet fuel. And if you have melted steel, then there has to be something else that happened. So those three things I would tell anyone on the fence to look into. Again, watch the videos again. And if you're comfortable with the the NIST recollection of those things, then just go ahead, just go about your life like nothing happened. But if those things start to stand out and you believe that things are not adding up, then continue to go down that rabbit hole and do your research, and you'll eventually find places like this where other like-minded people believe the same thing that you believe, and go from there.
What if they're scared? Say, I can't do that. I can't have my name out there associated with this, even if I believe it 110%.
Fear is not going to help you. If you're scared, that's okay. A lot of people are scared. You can be scared. You can choose to not do anything, but it just depends on how you see yourself. Are you someone that holds the truth in the highest regard? Are you someone that believes that as far as like physics and universal laws, if these things have to stand true and be universal, then you would know that it's not about fear, it's about science. And I think if you approach it from a scientific standpoint, the fear kind of pushes itself away. Like we kind of said offline, we never really jumped to why or what the why of the whole thing is, but just look at how it happened and what actually happened. We could save the why and the agendas for somewhere else, but if you just stick to the facts, stick to the physics, stick to the engineering, you can support yourself like through the fear. You know what I mean? Because you're speaking fact, and I think fact will always defeat fear.
Those are the words to end it on. Eric Francis-Wright, thank you so much for stepping forward, being part of this important effort, and of course for coming on 9/11 Freefall today.
Thank you for having me, Andy. I appreciated the conversation and look forward to talking about it more. Thank you.
There you go, folks. Another 9/11 Freefall. Great guest here. Remember, if you have any suggestions or comments about these shows, you can go to 911freefall.com or ae911truth.org. This is Andy Steele saying I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.